everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'm Nick Palavito. I will be your moderator for today's show. And to give you an idea of what we're going to be discussing will be the national debt and progress in Congress, if that's even possible. So with that, we're going to bring in a person who has gone to Congress and has talked to Congress and hopefully can get us some insight to the progress in Congress. None other than the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. David, good to have you here. And apparently you've made some progress in Congress, or tell us what's going on.
Well, I think you have to separate the short term from the structural. And as you may recall, Nick, at the end of March in 2023, I testified before the House Budget Committee, and I said that we needed to do three things in order to restore fiscal sanity and sustainability. Number one, you had to stop the bleeding. And what did I mean by that? You needed to cut. That means an absolute reduction, not a reduction in the rate of increase, but an absolute reduction in discretionary spending for fiscal 2024 as compared to 2023, because spending has gone up 40% in the last 4 years, which is well in excess of inflation. The second thing that I said you need to do is that you need to form a statutory fiscal stability, sustainability, debt, I don't care what you call it, commission that would engage the American people with the facts, the truth, tough choices, solicit input, make a package of recommendations, guaranteed up or down vote in Congress, where everything's on the table, mandatory spending, discretionary spending, revenues. Not everything's equal, but everything's got to be on the table. And that was to stabilize the patient. And fortunately, we have bipartisan bills that have been introduced in the House and in the Senate to create such a commission, with significant improvements over the last Simpson-Bowles commission. And there's been a hearing in the House of Representatives requested by the Speaker on that legislation, with all the sponsors from both houses participating in the hearing. And I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to see some movement on that in the House as part of either an extended CR or part of a budget agreement, because we can't just focus on year-to-year budgets. We need to start dealing with the disease, which is the structural imbalance. The third thing I said is that we have to cure the disease. We have fiscal cancer. We are addicted to deficits and debt, and we are mortgaging the future of our country, our kids, our grandkids at record rates. And the only way you can do that is to adopt a constitutional amendment that will limit how much debt as a percentage of the economy you can take on, absent extraordinary and unexpected conditions. Because statutory approaches, the debt ceiling and other approaches that have been taken, have been a bad joke. They haven't worked. One Congress can't bind the next Congress. The only thing that can bind current and future Congresses is a constitutional amendment. And on that, there is House Concurrent Resolution 24, which brings light, which hopefully will result in heat and action on the fact that Congress should have called a convention of states to propose such an amendment as far back as 1979. And we're gaining additional support at the state level for a possible suit against the Congress to force them to act because they've failed to discharge their constitutional responsibility. We'll see what happens. So those are the three things. On the short term, there's a tentative deal that's been reached between the Speaker and between the Majority Leader in the Senate, which does cut spending for fiscal 2024 as compared to 2023, arguably not as much as should be cut, but does. But the rest of it is not clear as to what else, what are the conditions, what else would come with it. And the last thing I'll say, then we can open it up, is I was in New Hampshire on Friday and Saturday, and I did two fiscal forums in New Hampshire on Friday and Saturday. And the first one was sponsored by the New Hampshire Journal, and it involved several persons, including, Joe Penland from Texas. You can find out more about Joe at Joe from Texas. He's a very successful entrepreneur who is concerned about this issue, and I've been partnering with him to try to help with citizen education engagement. Also, the majority leader of the Senate for New Hampshire was part of it. And then Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia decided to join us for the last half of the program. And, those that follow me on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter can find the video on there of the 1 hour program. I spoke for the first 10 minutes, and others spoke, and then we had about a half hour Q&A. And then the second one was to the New Hampshire GOP annual conference, because as you know, you've got the New Hampshire primary coming up a week from Tuesday, or a week from tomorrow. And obviously that was a very active scene, and you had all the different campaigns represented there as part of that process. So, I'll just wrap it up at that, and then we can have some interaction and get more into depth if we want to. But I will tell you this: no candidate has said enough about this issue. This is the number one threat to our future, economic security, national security, etc. And if a presidential candidate is not for a statutory commission and a fiscal responsibility amendment, they are part of the problem, not part of the solution. They need to be clear, they need to be strong, and they need to be unwavering with regard to those three things.
And with that, we're going to bring in some of our panelists from around the country and, frankly, around the world. First of all, we'll bring in Jim Eade, who is with the Eade Foundation in the San Francisco area. Shaquille Latimer, who's with, he's in Australia, mate, as a former billion-dollar money manager.
Shrimp on the Barbie.
What?
Shrimp on the Barbie.
Yeah, it's billion.
Something we don't do, by the way.
Oh, that's too bad. I love it.
Don't ruin us.
We call them fries over here.
He has his hands up. He's waiting to jump in the fray. And of course, Jatovi, the progressive person from the South. So, Rick, since you had your hand up first, you may bring in your
All right,
comment.
so there's a famous Ronald Reagan quote that goes something like, the scariest words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." But I would argue that when the government is paralyzed and people and consortiums of private individuals are compelled to take action on their own, it's even scarier. In the 60s in Oakland, when the community wasn't getting what it needed from the government, they formed the Black Panthers, which terrified America. When right-wing groups and groups along the southern border are dissatisfied with government efforts to address immigration, you get these vigilantes, which terrify people and really are, lead to bad outcomes. And so I agree with Dave that there are things the government should be doing, but if it remains paralyzed and fails to do them, then you're going to start seeing groups of private individuals trying to address this stuff. And that leads to, I don't know, worse, maybe scarier outcomes.
Right.
Well, first, let
David.
me state for the record that Rick is part of the Mega Society, not the MAGA Society. All right, so I don't want anybody to get confused.
There's a
by
difference.
that, all right? There's a big difference, and we won't go into that right now. The second thing is, look, there are certain things that government needs to do that you really can't delegate to the private sector or to individuals. All right, now, frankly, it's doing way more than that. All right, and frankly, what it's doing is more like getting resources, not linking them to results, right? So we're not getting value for money, and we're spending way more than we're taking in. So those are fundamental things. But one of the challenges that we have right now is when things are going well and government doesn't do anything, that's not so bad. But when things aren't going well and government is gridlocked and is not doing anything, and when things get worse with the passage of time, That is unacceptable. And that's where we are today. And it's complicated by the fact that we have not only a small margin between the Democrats and the Republicans in the House and the Senate, which means that every election is about control, which means that it's that much more difficult to get things passed for a variety of different reasons. Okay. And when we have not just a partisan divide, but an ideological divide between whether we're going to stick with founding principles and values or whether we're going to go to socialist state principles. Okay. Life is very complicated right now. And the last thing I would say is the biggest deficit we have in this country is not a fiscal deficit, although it's shockingly high and getting bigger. It's a leadership deficit. We have a leadership deficit. We have too many people that are focused on today, not taking enough steps to help create a better tomorrow. And that's got to change. And it starts at the top. And whether you're a Democrat or Republican or unaffiliated, if you don't have, and I'm unaffiliated, and if you don't have a president who recognizes that reality and acts accordingly and tries to bring people together to bridge these divides, we're going nowhere fast. And so let's hope that things change in 2024 because the USS America is taking on water. We can save the ship, but we're going to have to change course to save the ship.
I believe
Jim was up.
Yeah, thanks. And Dave, I applaud you on your efforts in Congress and I'm supportive of the items that you suggested, especially the debt committee, whatever we call it. It's got to be we've got to focus on this issue, and as you say, it's not being addressed. And in the campaigns, we're debating other things. We're not debating national debt so much. One of the things that I wanted to get your reaction to is, there's some demographic issues that are different from the past. People are living longer, and we had the baby boomer expanse of population that are getting older, and there aren't as many people to support them. So the pressure on Social Security and Medicare, those types of things, is going to just get worse. So how do we rationally distribute this? One of my ideas, and I wanted to run it by you, is that I think when it comes to Social Security and Medicare, you can exempt the people that cannot afford to pay for the care themselves, but limit the amount of money that you give or allow people with means to take advantage of these programs, because for a certain amount of but we also have to rein in the costs. The costs of medical care right now are out of control, and we have people going bankrupt by getting sick, by being ill.
Sure.
So I don't know what the answers are, but I do think that rational people have to get together and put their heads together to come up with some sort of attempt to solve this.
Thanks, Jim. Several things. One, there are three big differences, at least, between what's being proposed with the current commission and the Simpson-Bowles commission, and then I'll get to the demographics issue. The first is it's statutory, which means that the Congress and the president buy in up front. All right. Secondly, the percentage of commissioners who have to vote for a proposal is reduced from 75% to 50% plus one, which is significant, which means you've got much more of an ability to reach an agreement. And thirdly, it's and by the way, if they reach that agreement, guaranteed up or down vote can't be filibustered. All right, up or down vote. And the third thing is unlike Simpson-Bowles, which did good work, it has an express responsibility to do significant citizen education and engagement to solicit input before they make recommendations. Simpson-Bowles did not do that. That is the key to success, in my view. Secondly, on demographics, you're right. As has been said, demographics are destiny. And one of the biggest challenges that we have are the demographic changes that have taken place, as well as increased healthcare costs, if you will, and you get the compounding effect on healthcare. my latest book, which is American 2040, still a superpower, a pathway to success. I'm updating the book through 2023. It'll come out, sometime in February, probably. I'm self-publishing it, but I have a publisher who might be interested in buying the rights to it or obtaining the rights. It's not about money. It's about solving problems. I don't give a darn about the money. Okay. And in that book, I have what 77 to 97% of Americans agreed was the way forward to address Social Security, Medicare, taxes, defense, etc. Now, in Social Security, I'll give you an example. Again, this is not necessarily my opinion, not necessarily your opinion. This is what 77% of representative groups of voters agreed to. One, that you significantly raise the taxable wage-based cap.
Yes.
Don't eliminate it. You significantly raise it, probably about double what it is now, okay? Secondly, you don't raise the tax rate because it's very regressive. You pay it on the first dollar of wages and earn income you make. Thirdly, you gradually raise the normal retirement age, 2 to 3 years, over 20 to 30 years, but you exempt people that are, above a certain age, e.g. 55, okay? And so therefore, you're really just affecting the young people who, by the way, don't think they're going to get it anyway, and they're wrong. They are going to get it, okay? It's a matter of how much at what age. Thirdly, you modify the benefit formula to provide a higher replacement rate for people that are near the poverty level and a lower replacement rate for upper middle income and upper income individuals, but you don't turn it into a welfare program. You don't say that if you paid into it your whole life, you don't get anything, okay? Because then that totally undercuts public support for it. You modify the cost of living index to more reflect the cost of living for seniors rather than the entire population, and it is different, all right? And then for people who don't have a private pension plan alternative, you provide an automatic savings vehicle with collective investment, limited investment options, so they can end up benefiting from the power of compounding and be able to have more income other than just Social Security, because Social Security was never intended to be the sole source, of retirement income. And unfortunately for too many Americans, it is, okay? And so those are some of the things that 77% of Americans would agree to, which, by the way, if adopted, would not only solve the problem, but it would exceed the expectation of every generation of Americans. But the reason we haven't done it is because we don't have any leadership.
So, Dave,
last thing on this. Any presidential candidate who tells you they're not going to touch Social Security means that they're for a 20% across the board cut in 10 years in Social Security and for an 11% cut and increasing cut in Medicare benefits in less than 10 years. Because that's what you get if you do nothing. And that's another example of laggardship rather than leadership. Sorry, go ahead.
have you considered getting together with a fiction writer to write a fictionalized version of how the next 30 years might play out? Because there's a lot of crappy near future science fiction written by people who don't really understand the future. You have a pretty clear idea of how things might go to the good side or to the bad side, and that might make a good story.
And Rick's a good writer.
Well, yeah. Well, listen, this chapter, let's see, is it I think it's chapter 1 of the book talks about what things could look like in 2040 if we do nothing. But it's not just economic, it's national security, it's domestic tranquility, et cetera. Because keep in mind, if you don't put your finances in order, all right, you're not going to stay strong economically. You're not going to be able to fund an adequate military. You're not going to have as much diplomatic influence. You're not going to have as much cultural emulation. That's the leading indicator. It's the leading indicator on the way up and the way down. But, I've even had some people say, well, gee, you ought to make a movie out of this or a documentary or whatever. But, we'll see. But
Hey, Dave, along those same lines and everything, just really quickly, And in that same space, there is and I know Steve and other shows has mentioned this, there's a very popular trend. I know that Durham is looking at it. There's some cities out in California that are looking at it. So from an economic standpoint, what is your thoughts around smart cities? Because a lot of people are very big fans of smart cities, but then you've got other people that are concerned that that is the opposite of what you are proposing, because they see it as big government having too much of a hand in what's going on and everything. But I was wondering your take on this whole notion of smart cities, because we know that they exist not just here, but in other parts of the world as well. But I just wanted your take on that, because I do know.
Mark, do me a favor and elaborate on what you mean by smart cities, because I know a number of different things, initiatives that deal with municipalities, if you will, designed to try to help improve economic growth and opportunity in those cities. So what do you mean by smart cities?
A lot of that is what you're talking about. It's the travel. The buses are guided by the computers. A lot of the housing, and even where the housing is placed, is guided by computer programming and a number of things in that way. So it's using kind of algorithms and computer technology in order to help better maintain the cities. I know that there are several that are in California. So even Jim may have been able to give a better definition than I'm giving, but I know that even here, because I get around by mass transit, that a lot of the buses are hybrid type buses, so they are more controlled and they are more controlled by the media, and I mean not by the media, but by computers. And we even seeing, like, I think spot shotters, which is an ability to see when shots are taking place that police can respond to as well, would be an example of a smart city initiative as well. So definitely there's a couple of various initiatives, including the way that policing is done also. And Jim, if I misspoke on any of the smart city, please correct me and everything.
Yeah, Jim, if you want to elaborate any more on that before I comment.
Well, the smart city is a very complicated issue, and there's a lot of things that go into it. Mark is elaborating a little bit about, like, could we use AI to design cities better, smarter, and so that we don't waste as much resources as we do now. That's it in a nutshell. We can have a whole show on that.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Well, first, let me be on the record to say I'm for smart cities and against dumb cities. How's that? All right. But the other issue, you have a number of other initiatives underway. It's not just with regard to leveraging technology to try to be able to make informed decisions. It's also things like enterprise zones in order to try to be able to attract more private investment and to provide more opportunity. The other thing you have to keep in mind is, while at the federal level, our biggest challenges are, deal with pension and healthcare benefits. The same thing exists at the state and local level. The biggest challenge that exists for state and local governments are huge underfunded pension and huge unfunded retiree health cares. So a lot of these cities have got major problems there that they've got to come to grips with, and they've got to restructure as well. Now, an important difference is states can't file for bankruptcy under U.S. law. So they've got to solve their problem without filing for bankruptcy. Municipalities can. Obviously, you want to avoid that if you can, but we have had municipalities that have done that. So, you got to put your finances in order. You need to leverage technology, but you also figure out how you're going to be able to stimulate your economy to get more growth and to provide more opportunity. So you need to take a holistic approach, in my view. It's not just one dimension. It's a multidimensional and integrated approach.
Yeah, I think we had Shaquille up then, Rick.
So a couple of things that was said earlier. Firstly, I'm glad you didn't keep repeating the passage of timelines. I didn't want to hear a Kamala Harris version from your mouth, Dave. But no, I do want to talk about a couple of things in relation to the budget. I mentioned this on the last show. I think economists will be studying this for probably many decades. There has been a massive increase in the money supply during COVID, and there's also been an increase in deficit spending in the United States. Now, at the moment, it would appear that the United States is outperforming its peer group, especially if you compare it to the wealthy countries of Europe. But it also has a bigger deficit. So the question is going to be, is increasing deficits in a time of stress a good idea or a bad idea? And I think it's too early to tell, because right now, at the moment, it looks like it's a good idea. But we're going to need to find out what that looks like in 5 years and 10 years. So I think that's very interesting. Also very interesting to note that Milton Friedman, for example, criticized the Fed for not increasing the money supply during the Great Depression. Approximately 100 years later, 90 years later, we had a cataclysmic event that affected the world. The Fed did increase the money supply. I think that some of the division in the United States is that money hasn't been distributed in a way that has been beneficial to everybody. There's been certain groups that have benefited enormously from that. There have been other groups that have been left behind. But I do want to come back to the point about division. When I come to the United States, I do see division a lot on a number of big issues, especially race relations and the trans or the LGBTQ community. But actually, for the most part, I don't consider the United States to be particularly divided. It's divided not really even on the issues that I think you brought up, which is the founding principles of the US versus this sort of push by the radical left to turn the country into a socialist utopia, like Venezuela. But the reality is that you hang out
utopia. Oh, good. Go ahead.
There you go. But the reality is when you hang out with all the fun people in San Francisco that are on the left, that's not what they're asking for. They're often asking for a more European style delivery of things like what Jim just talked about, healthcare, because that's one of the most absurd situations anywhere in the Western world is that somebody could go bankrupt because of an illness or an injury. That just, or a disease, that just doesn't make any sense to the rest of the world that the United States allows that to happen. But is that those people asking for the country to become socialist? I don't think so. And I think that you guys are never going to talk about the things that actually bind you together, because why would you? You're not going to see, there's no media mileage to that. And one of the examples I've used before, I don't know any person in America that would say that they would prefer for the United States to become now back part of the Commonwealth and be ruled by Mother England once again, right? So on that issue, almost everybody in the country is a Republican on that issue, that you want to have elected representatives from the country, even if it's terrible. If the choice was a really dysfunctional Congress or have the royal family run the United States, you guys would prefer to have a dysfunctional Congress. So that's just one example. I mean, on so many issues, on issues of morality, on issues of what's fair, most Americans agree. I think that those issues that divide you get so much focus, and because of that, the attempts to fix them just skew off into all these other areas. One question I do have for you, Dave, though, you mentioned about fiscal responsibility in Congress, and I certainly hope for the sake of your country, which affects all the rest of us around the world that rely on your country for many things, I do hope that you're successful in being able to get those changes. But I'd like to ask you about a sort of quasi-government entity, the Fed. What about the Fed's spending? What about the Fed's rules and how they affect, for example, banks and things like that? We know, for example, that banks had to massively increase the amount of bonds that they have, and those bonds have taken a significant haircut. The Treasury and the Fed got together and said, well, we'll rate those at its full face value, even though the current prices of those have decreased dramatically. There are external factors from your elected representatives that affect the economy. I just wonder what your opinion is on how to manage that and navigate that.
That's a lot of topics. Let me try to take on several.
I'll take the last one.
Yeah. I'm going to quickly touch on the others, and then I'll take the last one. Not all debt is bad, and sometimes you have to run deficits. But what you can't do is you can't run deficits and accumulate debt in peacetime when you don't have a national emergency, when you're not at war. We've become addicted to deficits and debt, and that is fundamentally imprudent. Okay. Secondly, gaps. We have growing gaps. That's one of our challenges. We have growing gaps in society. If you look to what's happened in recent years, including during the COVID period, the middle class is the one that's getting hurt the most. We do have social safety nets, and we pushed out a lot more money for the social safety nets, during COVID, as an example. There was a huge amount of fraud, waste, and abuse, huge amount. But it also served to exacerbate the gaps between the haves and the have-nots. But the people who got squeezed the most were the people in the middle. Thirdly, healthcare. We spend the most highest percentage of our GDP on healthcare, and we get below average outcomes. That's obviously not acceptable or sustainable. The highest rate of bankruptcy in the United States is due to healthcare. There's a whole chapter in the book on what do we need to do about healthcare to make it. Fourthly, when I got the 77 to 97% agreement on reforms, to get that, you had to do several things, which any commission is going to need to do. First, you have to get people to agree that this is a problem that should be a top priority and needs to be solved sooner rather than later. Okay. Number two, you have to get them to agree to a goal. What are we trying to achieve? It's not a balanced budget. It's get debt to GDP to a reasonable and sustainable level, considering demographics and other factors over a reasonable period of time. Number three, you have to get them to agree to a set of principles and values that will bring people together rather than divide them apart. Okay. And we did. And we got 92% agreement on the following six. Pro-growth, because you want to grow the denominator faster than the numerator, which is the debt. If you do that, even if the debt's going up, you're making progress. All right. We're doing the opposite right now. Secondly, socially equitable. You need a solvent, sustainable, secure social safety net for those that are truly in need. Okay. Culturally acceptable. There's a limit as to how much the American people are going to allow government to do and the level of taxation. We're going to have more revenues, but there's a limit. Okay. We can learn from other countries, but we don't necessarily want to be the other countries, if you will. Fourthly, mathematical integrity. You got to have reasonable assumptions. You can't play games with the math, which typically, politicians do. They have pie in the sky assumptions, have dual sets of books. Fifthly, it's got to be politically feasible. You got to be able to pass the Senate and the House, and you got to get the signature of the president. All right. And sixthly, and it sounds redundant, but it's not, you have to have meaningful bipartisan support. You just can't have a few people on one side on the opposition vote for it. You've got to have a meaningful percentage of people to vote for it, because with the margins as close as they are right now, you may get a victory today, but when controls flips, you could lose it. All right. So it's got to be sustainable. With regard to the Fed, there's absolutely no question that the Fed had kept interest rates too low for too long. All right. There's absolutely no question that the Fed facilitated loose money policy, okay, because of that fact. There's absolutely no question that the Fed bought, self-dealing, a vast majority of the new debt that was issued as a result of COVID. Its balance sheet exploded, okay, which was designed to hold down interest rates in the short term, but obviously at some point in time it's got to be unwound, and you're going to have to deal with the consequences of that over time. In my view, the Fed needs reform as well. And to me, what the Fed needs to focus on is two things as its goals. One, promote economic growth, and two, maintain stable prices over time. Let me finish. It has a third goal right now that it was given back in the 80s, which is full employment. All right. And Congress has used the Fed to try to do things at times that, frankly, it's not the Fed's job. Okay. The unemployment has to do more with education. It has to do more with retraining. It has to do more with immigration policy. It has to do with, and also, government programs and whether they're incentives or disincentives to work and things of that nature. The Fed, in my view, has got to be focused on, on growth, macro growth, and on maintaining stable prices. And there should be limits, significant limits, on its ability to self-deal in our own debt. Because what ended up happening is the Fed intentionally or unintentionally enabled the modern monetary theory. It enabled Congress to spend trillions of dollars and then to monetize those trillions of dollars for short-term gain, but longer-term pain. That's my view.
Dave, I would suggest to you that if you're going to reform the Fed in the United States, which is one of the most important central banks in the world, but not the only one, that you would really have to have international agreement to reform central banks around the world, because the ECB then could get out of control and affect what's happening in the US. The Bank of England, not quite as big anymore, but same sort of thing. I do want to very quickly just touch on something that has been talked about, which is demographic change. I think that, look, we have an issue, but I don't think it's going to be quite as bleak, because millennials, people my age, the younger Gen Zs or the millennials, older millennials, are going to be 50 in 10 years' time. They're going to be 60. So this is a time when their kids have grown up, where they've got a lot more expendable income. They've normally already got assets behind them, that sort of thing. So there will be a release of money and built up wealth during that time. I think that we need to encourage younger people to have children earlier. I think that some of the advice given by boomer parents to their millennial kids has been make sure that you own a house first. Make sure you've got financial stability before you go and have children. I don't think that's realistic anymore. I think we also need to listen to what young people are saying to us about why they don't want to get married, because they don't think it's a very good deal. But I just want to say one very quick thing about immigration in relation to demographic change. I'm a bit disappointed when someone like Jerry Nadler says, hey, we need to have all these immigrants because we need to have a new influx of young people. I think immigration is great. I think the Western countries should encourage immigration within reason. Obviously, has to be some limits to it, but I think it's great. Well, I'm a beneficiary of immigration policies in Australia, but I really think that just replacing younger people with younger people from overseas instead of focusing on why, early 20s something and late 20s somethings are not actually getting married and having kids leaves a lot to be desired. I think we should focus on those sorts of things.
Several things real quick. One, totally agree. We need to coordinate. We're not an island, and we need to coordinate with regard to any reform of central bank systems. Number two, I believe in leading by example and practice what I preach. I got married at 19. We had our first children when I was 22. Our kids got married at 22, both. They had their first kids when they were 25. So we're trying to practice what we preach and lead by example, and I think you make some good points. Thirdly, with current mortgage rates, people can't afford a house anyway. I mean, they've gone up 266% since January of 2021. And the other thing is that, look, Jerry Nadler, fortunately, is not in the mainstream of America, okay? The truth is that we are a country of immigrants. We need immigration. In part, we need immigration because we have a low birth rate. We don't have a replacement rate, and therefore the only way the United States is going to grow is through immigration. But there's a difference between legal and illegal immigration, and there's a difference between on what basis do you allow for immigration. What we ought to be doing is we ought to be determining what are the macroeconomic needs and how can we match those needs with our immigration policy, and how can we end up improving our education training programs to complement that. To maximize growth and to maximize opportunity rather than just counting bodies, if you will. And we also need to differentiate between additional work permits for people who want to come in to pick the crops or cut the grass during the summertime or whatever else, and who don't necessarily want to stay here all year round, but want to come here to make money, and we need them to do that, versus a pathway to citizenship or a pathway to permanent legal status. So, but that's not going to happen until we secure the border. We've got to secure the border. No matter what any politician tells you, it's nowhere close to secure. I know Rick's had his hand up for a while.
Right. So most new ideas aren't socialist. If you flood medicine with AI to make it cheaper, that's not socialism. The solutions that'll save Miami and New Orleans and New York City from going underwater as the oceans rise, those will be capitalist market solutions. Companies will build gigantic seawalls and they'll make, trillions of bucks, saving the world that way. And we were talking about smart cities. I believe we're on the verge of a revolution in construction, in printing houses instead of hand building them. The trouble is water. You can't build all these new cities to hold all these people if you can't solve the water problem. There's not enough water to go around to build new big cities. Maybe you rebuild using new technology, the old Eastern cities, the Rust Belt cities. I don't know. And like a crazy thing, a thing that'll look crazy to the future is for 75 years, every adult member of a middle class and above family has their own car. With AI, you could do vehicles, and that car sits unused 23 hours a day. With some kind of AI system, you could do vehicle sharing that would save some resources.
Yeah,
Rick, you are not going to be sharing my Bentley. That's just all there is to it. Okay, it's mine. I'm going to stay in the garage 23 hours a day.
He doesn't want to share it. He just wants to get it.
I don't know. People would be interested in a time-shared Bentley.
No. But the answer is you're right. There's going to be a lot of innovations. A lot of things are going to take place. And for the record, as we know, water is by far the most precious resource. and we have increasing water challenges, especially in the western part of the country that's moving east. And FYI, the Naval Academy, which I taught at, it's got a water problem too, because you got rising tides, and it's going to end up having to have, it's going to have to be able to deal with that if it wants to continue to stay where it is. Yeah.
Hey, Dave, just really quickly, as I brought it up on the World Edition earlier, the show that was on before, but I was in a clubhouse room, and there was a gentleman there that was written a book talking about the death of American entrepreneurship. So he feels that we are not as entrepreneurial as we used to be, and he was definitely has written a couple of books. The guy's name is Joe, and everything about this. But I was wondering your thoughts around this, and there's also been conversations around the gap between those that are super wealthy and those that are in the poverty space and everything, whereas the middle class is getting squeezed, and definitely on that space. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about both of those, because like I said, when I had a very long conversation with him actually earlier this morning, it was like around midnight. Don't ask me why I was up at that hour and everything, but it was around this notion of the kind of this spirit of entrepreneurship and this spirit of going and creating businesses from the kind of grassroots up that he wasn't seeing as much as he had seen in the past. So and he's written, like I said, a couple of books about that. But I was wondering, do you agree with him that there is a death of entrepreneurship in this particular time in the year of 2024?
No, I think there's a change. Okay. I mean, first, the United States is clearly one of the most entrepreneurial countries in the world. I don't think there's any question about that. Okay. Although when you look, you can see several things. One, a lot of the most successful and innovative entrepreneurs are immigrants, and in particular from India. We've also got a pretty innovative and successful one from South Africa, and I won't mention any names. Okay, but I think the other thing you have to keep in mind is what's regulatory policy, right? I mean, there's a role for government regulation with regard to health and safety and and things of that nature. But some people believe that we've started to overregulate, okay, and therefore constrain entrepreneurs. I don't think you can say that our tax system constrains them, because many people would argue that one of the things we have to do is reform our tax system, because that's part of the growing gap issue, and we have a separate program to talk about that. But as I said before, look, we've got a pretty solid social safety net. Some would argue it needs to be reformed because we may be subsidizing too many people, all right, to the point of disincenting marriage, disincenting work. On the other hand, the wealthy people are going to do fine, and the gap has grown. Who's getting squeezed is the middle class. And by the way, this is one of the reasons why there's a huge gap between what the current administration is telling people and what people feel.
Right.
All right. Most Americans, you can tell me the inflation rate is going down, but prices aren't going down. Prices are just going up at a slower rate than they were going up. Okay. In addition, you can tell me that we now have real wage growth, meaning wages are going up faster than prices, but real wages are down from January of 2021. And by the way, inflation is up about 20% from January of 2021. Okay. And so people are saying, and food's up more than that, and energy's up more than that. Okay. And so people are basically asking themselves, and this is the middle class in particular, because the middle class is the one that gets hit the most. Am I better off today than I was then? And am I likely to be better off in the future based upon where we're headed? That's how people think, right?
Yeah, they definitely think that way. But Dave, one of the arguments that this gentleman was making was that he was feeling that people are, and I use the music analogy, that they're only kind of dipping their toes half-heartedly into entrepreneurship, because there's a lot of risk, and even Shaquille can speak to that as well, in entrepreneurship. So he was feeling that a lot of people are only half-heartedly going into entrepreneurship, and that they aren't really going into it whole hog and the full force the way that they could do in order to be successful at it. So he felt that there were a lot of what he called toe tippers. So they were just tipping their toes in the foot of entrepreneurship without actually putting that full force of their resources into what they can do to be successful.
Well, two things on that. I think there are generational differences between the degree of motivation and the willingness to work the kind of hours that you would have to work to be an entrepreneur between the younger generations and other generations.
Right.
All right. And I think you can't, I think that's real. Okay. But the second thing is they also better recognize that AI is going to have positive developments and negative developments. And AI is, just like automation affected blue collar workers. And by the way, AI will too. AI is going to affect a vast cross section of white collar workers.
Yes.
All right. So, there's going to be an opportunity and a need for people to get to be more entrepreneurial, because a lot of the traditional roles are going to be replaced through automation and through AI.
If I can
There's a lot of.
I gotta. Sorry, if I can just jump in, because I'm going to run for a few minutes to adjust a FX position I've got. I just want to say, in relation to immigrants coming to the United States, or really any other country, because it's not a phenomenon just for the US. You actually find that most Western countries, for some bizarre reason, immigrants come, and some of them don't do very well, but many of them actually start businesses and do very well. And it's an interesting study on why that happens. But I can just say for myself, I don't know why, but even I, who am considered to be a relatively successful person, have actually found much more success in Switzerland and Dubai and the United States than I have in my own country. So is it something that I'm doing wrong in Australia? I don't know. I do know that when I come to the US, I see lots of opportunities. I see opportunities for business ideas that I think would work really well in the US. And I see businesses in the US and I go, wow, that's a really good idea. I should bring that back to Australia. So, I don't know. I think that there's probably a different mentality. And also I'll just say, Mark, for some young families that come to the US, starting up something as simple as a corner store, or like a small grocery shop, or something like that, selling groceries or trinkets or whatever, it doesn't sound like you're going to make very much money out of that. You might just be surviving, but then over time you can expand. You put your kids through school. You put that hard working kind of thing in their minds, and they tend to exceed expectations. Whereas other people, especially people that were born in the United States or Australia, what do they say to their kids? You've got to have a work-life balance. You've got to make sure that you don't work too hard and that you don't have time to spend with your kids. And then you have a generation that we have now that the older generation accuses of not having enough of a work ethic. Well, yeah, of course they don't, because we told them not to. We told them to prioritize other things other than working. So yeah. I think that's probably part of the reason why it's different mentalities and different desires. I'll be back in a little while.
Take care.
No problem. And Jim had his hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about entrepreneurs. And, during the dot-com bubble, I was having lunch, and there was a couple of Stanford students, a man and a woman, and the man was pitching his launch to the woman. And I said, okay, it's time to sell. Because, there's an old story about like when your cab driver is telling you about his portfolio, get out of the market. And, so there's all sorts of, like, I live in the heart of Silicon Valley, all sorts of startups, all sorts, and it comes and goes. And I don't see that changing. I still see that there's a great desire to start a new company and put your mark, whatever it is that you think you're going to do. I do think that there is something that people, the younger generation, I don't know how they get started in Silicon Valley. The rents are out of the control. The housing prices are out of control. I don't know how they get going. So they tend to be a little bit discouraged. And when I was growing up, we thought we had opportunities. We thought we could do better than my parents did, and they thought they could do better than their parents could do. And the younger people I know today, a lot of them have the same sort of drive to do well with their lives, and they want to have the balance, no question about it. But I also hear a lot of discouragement. I see a rise in addiction, a rise in just cell phone orientation. They don't talk to each other now; they text each other. There's a lot of changes in our society that are harming the young and giving them less of a chance. But there are still those people with the dedication to succeed. And I don't think that has changed. The idea that you could do it is different now. There are too many obstacles now, people think. as to when I grew up, when I thought all I needed was willpower.
Rick, can I intervene just real quickly and then go to you? The word stewardship, all right? You know, it's not just trying to generate positive results today. It's not just trying to leave things better off. It's leaving things better positioned for the future. For the first time in the history of this country, we're at a record high of people believing that the future for their kids and grandkids will not be as good as they had it. That is un-American. It is immoral. It is unacceptable. And it goes to the heart of a lot of these economic issues we've been talking about. Rick?
So this is the era of the side hustle, which is being a half-assed entrepreneur. If you've got a ring light and a bubble butt, you can be a small business person on OnlyFans. You on eBay, like it would be. I think you'd be crazy to open up a boutique in a storefront now, but you can do the same thing with less capital outlay via eBay or Etsy. So there's lots of technology that lets people, dip their toes in without the $100,000 you're going to lose trying to open a restaurant and not making it.
Even in that restaurant space and everything, and because a friend of mine just recently opened a jazz club here in Durham, North Carolina, but they did something very innovative, and actually that came up in the conversation I was having yesterday as well, because versus just opening it up to the public, they went with that subscription model. So I think that that's something that's going new and different, and I'd love to hear your thoughts around that, Dave, because I think that even in a lot of businesses, including restaurants, are going more into that subscription model where you are given perks in order to come into the restaurant or come into whatever the business is and everything. But that seems to be a newer model that is maybe making a bigger push economically. But I'd love to hear your thoughts around that, Dave, because I'm seeing a number of people are doing that subscription model.
No, that's right. You also have different things like concierge service, right?
Right.
I mean, for healthcare, you don't have to wait as long. You get more TLC service. Of course, it costs more money too.
Yeah, but the thing is, there's a lot of opportunities out there, David. Right now, what we're investing in is heliostats, paleostats, and pyrolysis machines, which no one understands what it is. But the first one, here's what it does. You can go to the internet and look at it. It actually takes plastic and turns it into oil. It's a pyrolysis machine.
No, it's a reverse engineering kind of.
Yes, right. It's a pretty cool technology that we're augmenting by adding a heliostat, which is basically concentrated solar energy into the machine, so it runs free and turns plastic into oil. The other thing we're looking at is, you were talking about a water problem. Believe it or not, there's machines that turn air into water. The only problem, again, you have a power supply issue. Well, the heliostat, which is a concentrated machine, concentrates everything into the machine, will actually run the machine free and basically turn air into water. And you can basically look it on the internet. Now, those are innovations that we believe will make a difference. And I have a company that is working in that area right now. And we're going to launch the offering sometime probably in the next 6 months. But those things to me
just remember,
what?
Don't forget about your friends getting ready to make these offers.
Well, to me, those are opportunities that make a difference.
I agree. No. They're not just about economics. There's also
they're not just about economics. They're actually out to solve a problem that we have, as opposed to what we're looking at right now. Opening a restaurant and getting concierge service really doesn't solve anybody's problem. It just makes people work.
No, that's right. That's right. No, all right. So multiple benefits. Rick.
Yeah, MLK Day. Let me just mention that Twitter was going crazy yesterday because apparently the inventor of the air into water machine is some black guy who isn't getting credit for it.
No, I mean, you say the same thing about names in general.
That's
what's new.
I'll just ask the question to the crazy tech guys in California, because they all know I'm a technophobe. There has been some experimentation apparently done on what they're calling organoid intelligence, which is they're basically taking like minuscule brain stem cells and growing them in a petri dish. I'm probably describing this really badly. And the computers are sort of using that to kind of like work out how to think more like an actual human brain would. I hope that would actually be a great way to solve things like paralysis and other types of diseases. But
this is where AI actually
is this scary? Are we talking about the transhumanist kind of thing where technology is going to be implanted into our brains? And
this is where AI actually comes into play. Right now we have flat solar panels. The heliostat is convection, and what it does using AI, it actually tracks the sun. Which, remember, the sun doesn't go just back and forth this way. It actually moves this way. So the AI program actually will track the sun, so you maximize the light into a convective mirror.
Just really quickly, because I know we're winding down and everything, but one of the science fiction stories that I saw that really scared people was, hold on a second. Well, it's the science fiction stories that I saw that really scared folks was right now we pay for electricity. I mean, electricity is something you have to pay for. You have to pay for water. And there was a science fiction movie I saw maybe about 2 or 3 years ago that said, what will happen when we literally have to pay for air? And that's what you're almost talking about and everything. So are we nearing that point where air will become a commodity? Because that was a...
No, you're not able to turn air into water, and you can actually do it right now on the internet. You can go look at the machine. Apparently, Rick knows, the inventor of it. But what we're going to do is augment that intellectual property by being able to take the sun to basically energize the machine, so that you can actually set these machines up all through Australia and basically produce water anywhere in their country. That doesn't cost anything. It's one-time charge, setting it up, and then
Saudi Arabia and other parts of the Middle East will be very interested in that. Shaquille, just keep in mind one thing. Not all brains are equal.
Well, I know mine is a bit different to some others.
Octopuses have 9 brains. They have their center brain, and then each arm has its own brain. If you could take athletes and put little clusters of neurons at every one of their joints, and maybe paralyze people.
Rick, did you watch the NFL game yesterday? Because there was literally a commercial where there is technology that is out there now where they are studying the ways that the athletes are doing their training in order to figure out when they will get hurt and how they will get hurt, and in order to better predict their exercise regimen.
I don't even know how we're going to do sports.
With that, we're going to have.
I'm going to say so real quick, Rick. Most men have a second brain, but apparently the other one doesn't make great decisions.
What if you made that second brain
go
bigger?
down that road.
All right, guys. All right.
We'll see you next week on economics.
Be good.
Honorable
Speaking of
David.
neurons.
On that, we're leaving.